All right, I want to thank everyone for coming. This is Chiller Theater's Jaws panel. And got a great group of people here. Joe Alves, Sue Backlinie, Gottlieb, Jeff Kramer, and we're just going to go right into it. Now, we'll start technical end, I guess. Gottlieb, you co-wrote the screenplay. Do you, I guess in any short way we could do it, because I'm sure it's probably a long story. How that came about, you working on Joe's screenplay?
I was friends with Steven Spielberg. We had the same agent. We had I had acted in 2 of his television movies. I had helped him get used to Los Angeles when he was a young kid screenwriter, director who had just arrived in town. We went out to sell projects together, and he went off to do Sugarland Express, and when he came back from filming that, he saw the script for Jaws and read it and said, I want to direct this movie, but it needs some work. And then he sent me a copy of it with a note on the cover saying, eviscerate it. So I sent him a note telling him what I thought was wrong with the screenplay, and he showed the note to the producers, and they called me in for a breakfast meeting. And now all this is fairly standard procedure for engaging a new writer on a project. The thing that was different about Jaws was that this was 3 weeks before the start of principal photography, when the movie was going to start shooting. And I had all these ideas for changing the whole script around. But they said, can you leave tomorrow? And I was working as a story editor on The Odd Couple. So I resigned my TV gig and went to Boston with Steven, and he was casting local actors, and I was starting the rewrite in the hotel room. And then we roomed together on the vineyard in a house that the company had rented for us, and lived, ate, breathed the script until it was finished, until I was free to go, because all the acting and all the dialogue was done except for the last half of the shooting. We did, all the talking part took like 2.5 months, and all the fish part took another 3 months. And Joe Alves had to stay for all that. And Joe was the first hired and last hired. Joe was on the picture even before Steven Spielberg. So we lived and wrote and made changes and kept the script going throughout pieces of the novel, invented new business, rooted for the new actors, because we had the picture wasn't completely cast before we started work. It was quite an adventure. I wouldn't advise it to any filmmaker as a way to make a movie, but like Casablanca, which was also kind of made up at the last minute, sometimes it works.
That's great for you to jump in there. So you were hired before Spielberg?
Yes. Actually, how this works, in the studio system years ago, before, let's say, the mid-'70s, you pretty much, got kicked around until you found a home. And so I was a staff guy at Universal, and I was working on Night Gallery. I met Steven on that, did a couple televisions, and did his first feature, Sugarland Express. So Zanuck and Brown bought the book, Jaws, and they called me up, and they had the galley sheets. They didn't have a charge number. So they figured I would do these sketches for nothing, because I was doing a television movie there. And I did. I proceeded to do about 24 of these big charcoal sketches. You'll see them down at the Jaws thing. And the purpose was to sell the studio on doing a movie about a shark, because there really hadn't been one, and the studio wasn't too excited. So, briefly, Steven had been talked about doing it, but he was young. They felt a little insecure. They knew it was going to be a really complicated picture, working on the ocean. We had a meeting with all the heads of the departments at Universal, and I showed them the 24 sketches with the shark And it looked more like Moby Dick because we really hadn't researched great white sharks at this point. And so as we got through the discussion, this was at Marshall Green's office, who was the head of production. Incredible smart guy. And really without him, I don't know if we'd make this movie. Anyway, we got to the effects department, and they looked at it and they said, well, we can't do that. That'll take a year and a half, 2 years to make a shark like that. No one's ever did that. You know, that's all like that. And Stephen got involved. We said, well, you know, no tank, phony stuff for us. We're going to do a full-size shark in the real ocean. We were very brave and very young and naive. And so anyway, the effects department said, you know, it would take too long. Besides, we have more important movies like The Hindenburg. And Marshall Green got very upset, and he said, Jaws could be a bigger picture than The Hindenburg. And everybody sort of laughed. And so the meeting broke up, and Marshall called me back. He said, do you think you can get the most shark made? And I said, sure, you know. And he says, okay, take it off the lot. Now, this wasn't done very often. Have it made away from the studio. So I researched it. Everybody told me the same thing. 2 years, whatever. I found Bob Matty, who made the giant squid in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He was retired. Bob said, we could do it. Bob said we could do anything. And so we got 6 people. Roy Arbogast, who was a specialist in plastics and stuff. Long story short, started making the shark. This was the end of 73, around December. The book came out in January. The studio said, we got to start shooting this by May. Now, Bob didn't have a year and a half, he had 5 months. So when they said the shark didn't work, a little bit misgiving there. It worked, but we were testing it and shooting it at the same time. And that's how that started.
So what I'm going to do is we started a call to Joe, I'm going to go to Sue, and then ask Jeffrey something, because we're going to just play like potpourri and jump around, so we get some kind of feeling for what's going on. Now, Sue, you're known infamously as the first victim. You want to tell everyone how the casting go about on that?
Well, I was out doing a tiger movie in Canada when the call came in, and it took about 3 weeks for the production office to get the call through to me. So I figured I'd lost whatever I might have had. But when I called back, I told them I was in Canada, and they said that they would hold it for me because they didn't need it right this minute. And I stayed up there, finished that shoot, came back, went in and interviewed for it. And a general stuntman, an older stuntman in the business, had put my name in for it because they asked him, because he specialized in water work. And he put my name in, and I went in with my portfolio, and I lucked out and got the job.
Didn't they originally want an actress and not a stunt person, and you ended up, Bill Gilmore was the one that really pushed you?
Yeah, Stephen wanted an actress in New York, and they kind of pushed me on him because I told him, I said, look, the way to do it is if you can do the same girl for both the stunt and the acting, you can do close-ups. You know, if you've got a stunt person doing a part, you can't show their face, so that means that the reality of it you don't get as well. So that's kind of, I think, a lot of why I got the part, because I could do both parts.
I don't mean to interrupt her, but because I was on the set when we rigged her. You want to talk about how you were rigged?
They put a pair of cut-off Levi's on me with metal sides, and they ran cables from myself sideways to pilings, and then all the way into the beach. And they had men. They had marks, 3 men on each line, and they ran back and forth and pulled me through the water. So I had a free ride. They were the guys who were working.
Wow, this is great. I could just sit back and let this thing run itself. Jeffrey.
Yes,
How are you, sir?
I'm good.
Can you tell us a little how you got cast?
Sure. I grew up in part of Martha's Vineyard. My mom was born on Martha's Vineyard. And I happened to read, I was an actor in New York, and read in the local paper that they were casting this movie on the Vineyard. So I called my agent, who I went to Boston, met Stephen, And it's the only time in my life that I ever left a meeting and I turned to the guy who had gone and read with me and I said, I'm going to get this. Trust me, I've never done that since. Walked out and said, oh boy, I'm going to get this. But I did. And it was unbelievable. I mean, the first day's principal photography, when I kind of find the first victim and throw up on the beach, I was so nervous I could have really thrown up. It was the first day of principal photography. We were all so nervous. And you know, we all talk about this myth and whatever, but who knew what this movie was going to turn out to be? I mean, Carl will tell you the rumors were rampant that they were over budget, they were going to pull the plug. And here we are a few years later with lifelong friends and having had this experience and making Jaws 2, they say that if any of us ever go to prison, you get 9 months off of any jail term just for doing Jaws 2, because it took so long.
Jaws 2 was an equally difficult shoot. They had offered it to me as a writer after, when they were first planning it, and it was in the great genre of universal negotiations. Here's a penny and a half, take it or leave it. And I said to my agent, you know, it's insulting. I'm not going to take that job, but they'll be back and it's going to cost them. I got to not take this call. So later,
After they fired the first
after they fired the first director and threw that script in the wastebasket, they called me up and said, can you come down to Florida? And, well, first, can you think of a concept that will save this movie, which I worked on with Verna Fields, who was an executive editor and executive production, and she had won the Academy Award for editing Jaws, and we figured out what we could do, and Jeannot Swark was a director that Joe was familiar with, who was on the Universal lot, who knew how to shoot.
From Night Gallery.
From Night Gallery, who knew how to shoot fast and hard and cheap and was ready for a big picture. So off I went down to Florida and did Jaws 2, which in its time was the most successful sequel of all time, just as Jaws was the most successful movie. And I have to tell you one thing about sequels, and this will explain Friday the 13th, Part 9, and Police Academy 12. In the world of Hollywood and sequels, only the last one loses money.
So we don't talk about 4.
Yeah, and so we don't talk about Jaws 4.
You wanted to mention
Yeah,
something about
you know, this was a small movie, so I didn't have a big crew. After there was an okay, we got a green light. We had to scout a location, and so they sent me. Zanuck always like said we sent a team. No, they sent me. Couldn't afford it. Sent a lot of people. But I was looking for a location of a village and a fishing village in a beautiful little town, and I also was looking for a bay that was a depth of 25 feet and a very small tide change, because the shark mechanism that Bob had came up with, the shark would come up, and that way, if it was too low, you'd see the mechanism. If it was too high, you wouldn't see the shark. So, in any case, I had a lot of nautical maps. I met Peter Benchley in New York, and we sat down, and I said, so Peter, where did you write this? What did you, you know, you had places that you had intended to put this, and he said, well, not really. Montauk is a good fishing village, Sag Harbor, Stonington, you know, all these places. So I'm looking at a map, and I said, okay, what about these islands? Oh, Nantucket. Yeah, Nantucket is good. Go there. My mother, father lived there, and she'll fix you cream cheese and cucumber sandwiches. Very typical New England thing. I said, what about this other island, Martha's Vineyard? He said, no, there's nothing there. So anyway. It was December 17th I started the scouting. And the reason I know this, because I did this book, and Matt Taylor, I had gone into Martha's Vineyard, and it was cold, and there was snow, and the television was on, and O.J. Simpson ran for 2,000 yards and broke the record. And he researched it and said, yeah, that was December 17th. So in any case, I just sort of drove up all the way up the coast and got out freezing to death taking pictures of beaches with snow. And I went up all the way to Portland, Maine and came back and the tides are too high there. So I headed out to Nantucket and it was so rough, the boat turned around. And there was a ferry to Martha's Vineyard. And I said, okay, why not? So I went to the vineyard. And I drove up to Edgartown, and it was perfect. Absolutely perfect, beautiful little town that you would love to have a shark terrorize. And then Menemsha, I was a big fan of David Lean's. And when I came up to Menemsha, I climbed up the hill, and I said, oh my God, David Lean would have built this whole thing. And right at the beginning of the little tributary there was an empty lot, and perfect for Quinn Shack. So I went back to the studio very excited, and Stephen loved it. He had other people suggesting other places, but I said, this is great. Richard Zanuck wasn't so excited. Richard and David Brown come from a higher echelon of people, being the president of Fox when he was 27, and David was editor of Cosmopolitan, Helen and Gottlieb Brown. He said, you know, there's a lot of rich people that live in Martha's Vineyard. I don't think they'd like to have a shark in their backyard. By the same token, there's a lot of people that live there all year round that don't have jobs. So we provided jobs, and we opened the hotels, and I took a painter and a carpenter, and they built the boats, and they built the house, and so it worked out extremely well for us. And of course, they just happened to have a bay with 25 feet of water with a 2-foot tide. Unfortunately, I had a lot of sailboats later, but that's how that happened.
So Carl, I have a question. Were you required at any point to actually come onto the set with pages during the production of the film?
Well, I tried to write at least the night before so that the pages could be mimeographed in the morning and distributed to the crew and the actors. That's as close as we cut it, where I would finish at 11 o'clock. Zanuck and Brown would read, or Zanuck or Brown or Stephen would read the pages and prove them. They'd take them to the poor secretaries who had to wake up at 5 in the morning and mimeograph them and hand them out to the crew. When I started doing the rewrite, I started writing the first day of shooting because that was coming up. So I wrote Jeffrey's scene and Chrissy's dialogue with the young Jonathan Filley, who later went on to become a producer, big-time producer in New York City, doing a lot of big films. So I was just trying to stay ahead of the schedule. And when a film shoots, it shoots out of sequence. You don't shoot the story like a novel, start at page 1 and go to the end. You're jumping around depending on the availability of locations and actors and script pages. and we had to constantly keep this whole imaginary film in our head because, you know, a third of it was written, a third of it was being written, and a third of it wasn't written yet. But those thirds were divided into pages scattered over 110, 120 page screenplay. So, you know, page 1 and 2 were good, 3 and 4 didn't exist yet, 5 and 6 were in process, and we had to keep remembering what was happening. It was hell on the crew and the actors and everybody else. Jeff can tell you.
I want to tell you something about Carl. Carl was a writer on this movie, but he had also been an actor, and he was acting in this movie. And the writer in Carl cut the actor Carl's scenes down. He had told us once he had to cut his own dialogue, which you can imagine what that does to an actor.
Painful experience.
Well, I just want to point out something. There was a threat of an actors' strike in June, so they wanted us to start shooting even earlier, like in May. And so we had to do everything but the shark stuff first. So we had these poor extras going out into, you know what the ocean's like in May in Martha's Vineyard? Unbelievable.
Yeah. when it came time to film the people running from the ocean, running out of the water in panic, didn't take any incentive. You didn't have to say, run faster. All you had to basically hold everybody in place, say, no, wait for it, rolling, camera A, camera B, camera C, are they all rolling? Okay, people out of the water, and they trampled each other to get out of the water, which worked in story terms. It gave us the panic we needed. Filmmaker is a way to make a movie, but like Casablanca, which was also kind of made up at the last minute, sometimes it works.
That's great for you to jump in there. So you were hired before Spielberg?
Yes. Actually, how this works, in the studio system, years ago, before, let's say, the mid-'70s, you pretty much, got kicked around until you found a home. And so I was a staff guy at Universal, and I was working on Night Gallery. I met Stephen on that, did a couple televisions, and did his first feature, Sugarland Express. So Zanuck and Brown bought the book, Jaws. And
What's screenplay?
I was friends with Steven Spielberg. We had the same agent. We had I had acted in 2 of his television movies. I had helped him get used to Los Angeles when he was a young kid screenwriter, director who had just arrived in town. We went out to sell projects together, and he went off to do Sugarland Express. And when he came back from filming that, he saw the script for Jaws and read it and said, I want to direct this movie, but it needs some work. And then he sent me a copy of it with a note on the cover saying, eviscerate it. So I sent him a note telling him what I thought was wrong with the screenplay, and he showed the note to the producers, and they called me in for a breakfast.
All right, I want to thank everyone for coming. Chiller Theater's Jaws panel. And got a great group of people here. Joe Alves, Sue Backlinie, Gottlieb, Jeff Kramer, and we're just going to go right into it. Now, we'll start technical end, I guess. Carl Gottlieb, you co-wrote the screenplay. Do you, I guess in any short way we could do it, because I'm sure it's probably a long story. How that came about, you working on Joe?
Free to go because all the acting and all the dialogue was done except for the last half of the shooting. We did, all the talking part took like 2.5 months, and all the fish part took another 3 months. And Joe Alves had to stay for all that. And Joe was the first hired and last hired. Joe was on the picture even before Steven Spielberg. So we lived and wrote and made changes and kept the script going throughout pieces of the novel, invented new business, rooted for the new actors because we had the picture wasn't completely cast before we started work. It was quite an adventure. I wouldn't advise it to any filmist meeting. And now all this is fairly standard procedure for engaging a new writer on a project. The thing that was different about Jaws was that this was 3 weeks before the start of principal photography when the movie was going to start shooting. And I had all these ideas for changing the whole script around. But they said, can you leave tomorrow? And I was working as a story editor on The Odd Couple. So I resigned my TV gig and went to Boston with Stephen, and he was casting local actors, and I was starting the rewrite in the hotel room. And then we roomed together on the vineyard in a house that the company had rented for us, and lived, ate, breathed the script until it was finished, until I was